What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. I'll be completely honest with you guys and say that unfortunately I'm not really in the best mood this morning, but with so many things coming out, I know that I'm going to fall behind on videos if I don't sit down and talk about She-Hulk now. So yeah, I just finished watching the finale. Let's get into this. She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. Directed by Kat Coiro Anu Valia, this stars people like Tatiana Maslany as She-Hulk herself, Jennifer Walters. You also have people like Gonzaga in here, Jamil, and then a bunch of returning faces to the MCU like Tim Roth, Mark Ruffalo, Benedict Wong, and Charlie Cox. So I've been watching She-Hulk Attorney at Law week to week like most of us have, or I would say majority of Marvel fans have, and you know, it's been a mixed bag in terms of reactions online. I'm not gonna make this a full breakdown of every single episode and everything that happens, but I'm just gonna kind of speak freely, so I will be talking on spoilers and stuff that happened in different episodes and just kind of talk about my thoughts on the show overall. I should also add that before I get too far into this, She-Hulk was definitely a set of comics and just a character in the comics that I've always enjoyed seeing pop up. I always enjoyed the way that she, like a lot of other characters, probably most notably Deadpool, would break the fourth wall, and I always just kind of liked her interactions with a lot of the characters and kind of seeing the hookups with certain characters and her just kind of being this character who doesn't really care about like kind of hiding who she is in a lot of ways as time goes on. And specifically, I've always really enjoyed like comic books that have included her and Wolverine or Daredevil, like we see here in this show. And so yeah, I really was looking forward to this show because I wanted to see them do something a little bit different, and they definitely did something very different. Going into this, they made it known that this was going to be a comedy, Marvel's first ever official comedy that was not going for more of an action drama that just so happens to have humor in it like most of Marvel projects do. This was going to be more of a full-fledged comedy. So right out of the gate, this film or the show has far more of a comedy tone to it. Everything about it is a lot more slapsticky and silly, and the fourth wall breaking throughout the course of the show, though inconsistent at times, is something that definitely leans into that humor. This is also a weird show to kind of critique because I have criticisms on the show overall, and what I'll say is, similar to Ms. Marvel, I just feel like the stakes are really, really low, and I feel like ultimately I didn't necessarily need this to be a huge action movie or show, but I definitely wish that I was more connected to the various storylines and characters that are going on here, and ultimately I feel like the show ended up being a bit of a messy show narratively, and they used the fourth wall breaking element in this show to kind of dive deeper into some of those criticisms, and they kind of make you realize, well, should I be upset at the show when it literally started the episode saying, hey, I know you're probably expecting there to be a bunch of action in this episode, but this is just going to be the wedding episode, or hey, are we really doing this in the writing right now? Like moments like that where they're making reference to things that you may not like that are happening on screen, and so it's hard to really criticize it other than calling it, I guess, a little bit lazy at times, but it's also making note of it, so it's kind of like something that feels intentional, so you kind of have to be like, oh, okay, that's what they were going for. They know that we as an audience are kind of feeling a little bit off about what's happening narratively, or we have certain expectations, and this show is specifically telling us with these fourth wall breaking moments what this show is going to be and what it's not going to be. And so yeah, it's kind of hard to criticize fully in the same way that I would another show, even something like Ms. Marvel that had a more streamlined narrative, because this show goes out of its way to say that, hey, we know that you're not really liking what's going on, or you might be a little confused as to where we're going with the show, but yeah, this episode is going to be this episode, or yeah, this is happening for a reason. And yeah, I think that this is a little bit strange too, that this is happening in the writing room. What are the writers thinking? And now here with the finale, we have this whole sequence where she literally comes out of Disney Plus and goes to Marvel Studios headquarters and meets with the writers, and there's the whole funny gag about going to see Kevin, which of course I think we all thought was going to be Kevin Feige, turns out to be this AI. And yeah, you know, that kind of recontextualizes our whole view on the MCU and how meta this show is versus what we know with the MCU. And yeah, it does become a little bit messy, and it's tough, again, because She-Hulk herself says that in this episode, that all these storylines aren't coming together well, that the story is messy, but in the end it was intentional. But I think that it ultimately made an entire show that doesn't really have a fulfilling narrative to follow and feels more like just a silly Saturday morning cartoon, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but in the modern world and what we come to expect with the MCU, unfortunately did leave me a little bit disappointed. And I would definitely say, unfortunately, that both this and Ms. Marvel, which are the two most recent things they've released in terms of TV, unfortunately are my least favorite things to come out in the MCU. And I kind of hate feeling that way because I'm excited about it. And this show makes a lot of reference to the fact that there are a lot of men out there that are misogynist and that don't like to see women thriving in film and movies and TVs, and often have a lot to say online when we have characters like this, She-Hulk, that literally has the name of a male character in their title and just has some sort of female thing thrown on. And so in the case of this show, they make a lot of references to that, and a lot of the story kind of leans into the fact that there is a lot of male misogyny out there, which to an extent I thought was funny and I enjoyed seeing, but to a certain extent as well, I feel like was kind of undercutting its own message by honing in on it too much, to be completely honest. It was something that took me out of it from time to time because it just felt like we were going there again. And as somebody who loves seeing stuff like this, who loves female superheroes, who loves even superheroes that are female versions of male characters, or, you know, a gender swap kind of thing, like a She-Hulk, like a Spider-Girl, like a Spider-Woman, like Batwoman, you know, whatever the case may be, there are so many characters like that, and I've had fun watching and reading and seeing and playing video games that feature these characters for years. And so I didn't mind that the show included it. I just felt that it leaned too heavily into it, where it felt like part of the show in like the sense of it being almost like a character. I will say that the first few episodes I was completely hooked in, and just the first few episodes alone I think I enjoyed more so than all of Ms. Marvel, to be completely honest. I found that all the setup with her kind of learning about her powers and her not necessarily being willing to learn, but kind of having to learn over time, and the time spent with her and Mark Ruffalo, who shows up here as the Hulk, I thought was great. Him teaching her, I thought that was all awesome. I really enjoyed their cousin chemistry there, and I thought that Tatiana Maslany as well as Mark Ruffalo were great. Then you have other returning great cast members throughout the course of the show. People like Tim Roth returning to play Abomination, who we did see briefly in Shang-Chi, and this kind of connects into that and shows us where he came from. That kind of led us into that fight that we see with him and Benedict Wong, or Wong, in Shang-Chi. And so yeah, it was awesome to see how that all kind of was connected and tied in. It was great to see Wong again. I love seeing Wong appear anywhere. Something that's interesting about this show that I think is going to work for some and not work for others is, like I mentioned, it is a comedy, and so a lot of these characters that are coming in, if they are a bit of a darker character or have had darker takes in the past, this show definitely leans into them being a little bit more silly. I think all these characters have had some level of humor to some degree, but at times this definitely leans into it being far more funny, specifically with somebody like Tim Roth as Abomination, or even Wong, who has been funny in the Doctor Strange movies, so I don't think it's completely out of character, but he's a little bit more goofy here. And then I think the one that's the most notable is Charlie Cox returning as Daredevil. Now, we did get to see him properly return to the MCU with Spider-Man No Way Home, but he was just Matt Murdock there, and here we get to see him in the suit, but not just any suit, it's the classic yellow and red suit from the comic books. They kind of give it a bit of a different look here. It kind of has like a purplishly look at times, but overall, yeah, it was nice to see Charlie Cox return to the role. It was great to see him as Daredevil in the costume, a classic look to the costume. I know some people didn't like it, but I felt like if they were going to do it anywhere, it made sense in a show as goofy as this. But I will say, I know that some people weren't crazy about how silly he was and a lot of the one-liners he was making in this show, and I can't necessarily begrudge you. I enjoyed it because I'm familiar with cartoons that featured Daredevil when I was a kid, with him and Spider-Man, and just reading comic books where he's always kind of had a little bit of a goofier side to him. And I also have a special place in my heart for that really cheesy Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. So for me, Daredevil, when it comes to the things I grew up with in terms of comics and just some of the TV stuff and the video games, he's always had a bit of a goofier edge, especially in that yellow and red suit. So to see him in that suit in this show, it felt kind of made sense, and it was just great to have him involved here. He, without a doubt, was one of my my favorite parts, even though he's in the show very briefly, and without a doubt is definitely one of the standout moments in the show for me. Kind of the same way I feel about the other characters. I feel like the cameos and their involvement in the story, even if it was a little goofy at times, ultimately was what I found myself attached to the most. And I never really found myself super in love with the story that was being told by Tatiana Maslany for Jennifer Walters and She-Hulk. I think there is a good show in here. I just think it gets muddled down by having too many characters, too many storylines, and too many silly things. I also felt that the show kind of suffered from having just really extreme characters. You know, like everybody was an extreme of a certain stereotype, whether it was a girl, whether it was a gay man, whether it was a killer, whether it was a male misogynist. Everybody that was in this show was just amped up to 11, and it just didn't feel realistic. It didn't feel tangible. And again, that's kind of where I have to kind of take a step back and recognize that this is a comedy, that this was promised to be a comedy, that the show is literally talking directly to the audience and telling you this episode is going to be this show is going to be this, don't expect this. The show, for the first time ever in the MCU, the product is literally telling us what to expect and what not to expect, and referencing when they themselves thinks that things are getting a little bit muddled. So it's hard to really critique on the same way that you would something else, because it doesn't take itself seriously in the same way that something like a Captain America Winter Soldier does, or the Incredible Hulk, or the Avengers movies, you know? And so now seeing this kind of meta outside of the world kind of thing, and the fact that She-Hulk can bounce between that and in and out of that, I am very curious to see what they do. I am very curious to see how they handle things even moving forward with Deadpool getting involved. He's the one that I felt made the most sense to kind of handle that, but now we have She-Hulk doing it before he does properly in the MCU, and so definitely curious to see how they tie that all in. But yeah, overall, it was nice to see the returning characters. Again, I wasn't crazy about the show. I will also say one of the things people were kind of dogging on in terms of the show that I kind of have to agree with is the CGI at times. I think there were times, especially in the first few episodes with the Hulk, where both She-Hulk and the Hulk looked great. And there were times even with Abomination where he looked great. There were times where a lot of the special effects looked really good. But there were a lot of times where She-Hulk just did not look good. There were a couple of moments where you could see the budget must have been spread thin, and she just looks overly cartoony alongside a bunch of regular humans. And then there's other times where she looks really, really good. And so I did find that inconsistency. And again, the show makes reference to the fact that there were budgetary restraints in terms of how she looks. So again, it's like, how harsh do you come in terms of criticism when the show is literally telling you what to expect, what not to expect, and is joking on itself when it comes to elements that are working or not working. It's a really, really strange show to kind of critique in the MCU. But moving forward, I am looking forward to seeing how other writers and other products and other, shows and movies that feature She-Hulk will utilize her moving forward. She's still a character I'm excited to see in the MCU. I can't wait to see her on the big screen, in the movies, with these other characters. I am curious to see how they'll handle the fourth wall breaking for both her and characters like Deadpool. But yeah, overall, I could say that there was a lot about this show that I enjoyed in terms of like a launching pad for what's to come, but overall I just wish that I was more invested in the narrative and the overall trajectory of Jennifer Walters' story. And by the time we got to the end, I just found myself thinking, that was all right. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I would say I enjoyed it, and that's kind of how I felt about Ms. Marvel. I enjoyed it. I wasn't crazy about it. Didn't love it. Didn't hate it. Just, it was just a Marvel product that was there that's, setting up the future. And I think definitely one of the things that people are going to be talking about the most, and I'm not necessarily sure I love how they completely approached showing it off, is the Hulk goes away to Sakaar, and he's in space, and then he shows up in the finale, and he's with his son Scar. So I think they're going to lean into Planet Hulk, definitely, and lean into maybe the comic line, Scar, Son of Hulk, which is an interesting storyline, and I'm definitely curious to see how they do that, but I didn't expect them to introduce it like this. I feel like, again, it just kind of leans into the messy storytelling that this show specifically had. So anyway, a big thanks to you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed me rambling about She-Hulk, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about the show. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you enjoy the cameos? Were you turned off by seeing Daredevil make one-liner jokes? Did you not like seeing Abomination in clothing? Did you like seeing Wong in here? Whatever the case may be, let me know what your thoughts are down below, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.